Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Bill discovers Hayley and Randy's conversation. The reveal is not a neat cinematic cutaway or a whisper heard through an open window, it is a collision of ordinary things that, when rearranged, create a new, terrible alignment. A coffee mug left on the porch railing, a smear of lipstick on a napkin, a text message flashed briefly on a cracked phone screen. These are the small betrayals that accumulate until Bill's life, the house he has kept and the people he loves, are suddenly reframed as fragile objects on a ledge. He has always been a man of habit, someone who trusts what he sees and the rhythm of everyday rituals. The ordinary is his proof that the world is balanced. That balance snapped when he overhears the two voices in his own home, Hayley's, soft and practical, and Randy's, a low, impatient rumble that promises quick fixes and off-the-books solutions. The scene that led to this discovery began earlier, in a plan hatched with clinical detachment. Hayley, after a failed attempt to poison Bill, an attempt that was messy, human, and full of second thought, Shade told Randy that there was another way. She speaks to him of insurance policies and timing, of how small choices can yield large, irreversible results. Randy, who has never been good at patience or nuance, hears a sentence as a promise. He sees escape. She sees the numbers in her bank account and the suffocating weight of obligations. She sees a future where she is unmoored from debt and humiliation. Their conversation is transactional, but not cold. There is fear braided with the thrill of being on the edge of something seismic. They do not imagine how the jagged edges of what they plan to do will cut them in return. Hayley arranges to meet Randy at her house, a detail that feels deceptively intimate, as if a home could have the private complicity of a conspirator. Bill comes home unexpectedly. The narrative moment when a character returns sooner than the conspirators assume is a classic device. But here it feels like a moral test. Hayley's reaction is immediate, the shift of posture, the sudden smallness in her face. Randy is calm for a beat too long. It is not confidence but the cunning of someone caught in a web who is waiting to see if a lie will hold. Bill's shock is not theatrical at first. It is slow and domestic, as hand on the door handle, the keys that do not fit for a second, the way his eyes settle on Hayley and then to Randy, trying to reconcile them with the version of Hayley who had once stood beside him in the kitchen, who had comforted him over late-night bills and scraped knees. There is a history between the three of them, and in that history Bill tries to place this moment like a pin on a map. The map does not match what he sees. He knows the truth of the poisoned cup, of furtive glances, of late-night conversations, because he has found a thread of evidence and followed it. The discovery is not cinematic. It is painfully ordinary. He does not shout immediately. Instead, the betrayal hits him in the chest like cold water. It makes him giddy with a vertigo of disbelief. Bill's reaction is physical, a pressure behind the ribs, his fingers clutching the door frame to steady himself. The first words that fall out are small and incredulous. He asks Hayley if she is really going to do this. The voice of a man who had once trusted so wholly that he did not know how to prepare for treachery. Randy's response, intentionally corrosive, presses into that fissure. Randy loses an opportunity to salvage anything human. He jeers, he provokes, his taunts are surgical. He knows how to wound. The man who has lived with this household's rhythms uses words as levers. He tells Bill that this is their chance, that the stroke Bill is now experiencing because soon it commences an opportunity not to be missed. The language Randy uses, flippant and mercenary, reduces a human collapse to an instrument. He blocks Hayley when she instinctively reaches for the small emergency bottle in the cabinet. Her hand trembles, and for a split second the film shows not a conspirator but a mother, a woman who once had the capacity to love, now reduced to a question of whether she will permit the scale of her choices to tip into murder. The seizure Bill's convulsion is not a clean cinematic device. It is ugly and true. He drops to the hardwood as if gravity has a personal vendetta. His breath becomes a machine shuddering. Medical detail is not the point so much as the human cost, the eyes rolling, the involuntary arching of his back, the helpless fingers clawing at air. He tries to speak, something about not wanting to die, about a house and a life and a future, but Randy's crude commentary cuts through. He tells Hayley to let it be, that this is the moment when the insurance will pay out because death will look natural, because a stroke, a tragic accident, is neat. It is the language of someone who imagines that paperwork can absolve conscience. Hayley listens and wants to move, to give Bill the pills that could steady his heart or buy him time. But Randy physically steps between her and the emergency drugs, and the camera lingers on the simple domestic choreography: hands, a bottle of pills, a crooked lamp throwing yellow light across a room that used to be ordinary. What makes this scene unbearable is not just the physical danger to Bill but the moral collapse it reveals. Hayley's inner life is the film's primary ache. She has not turned into a villain overnight. The narrative of her life debts, humiliations, whispered promises unfurls in internal monologue and memory flashes. The poisoned cup earlier had been a desperate, clumsy attempt that failed because something in her recoiled. She wanted a way out, not necessarily a end built on blood. She has clung to Randy because he offered a solution that seemed pragmatic, and because, in the dark, the appeal of decisive action can feel like a bomb. But when Randy's broke coldness meets the living, breathing reality of Bill collapsing on the floor, she feels the fulcrum of her life twist. The film insists that each human choice is an accumulation, not an isolated event. Hayley's hesitation is a moral crucible. She steps toward Bill because instinct and old affection pull her, and Randy's hand becomes the hand of fate, physically forbidding and morally monstrous. The viewer is asked to parse loyalty and survival. There is also a legal realism in Randy's calculations: insurance, the small print, time of death classifications. The screenplay uses these details not to instruct criminals but to show how extremity empties a person of compassion. Randy paints a future of two people on the run with Hayley's share of the money, a cinematic escape route that ignores the gravity of violence. Hayley is not convinced by the fantasy. She is terrified by the consequences. She looks at Bill's unmoving face and feels the sudden, visceral regret that comes before a catastrophic choice. The camera pulls back just enough to show the room's furniture, the family portraits on the wall that frame a life now at stake. These images are not merely symbols but anchors to a past she cannot sever without losing herself. While this violent moral triangle unfolds in the house, parallel stakes are being navigated by Jacob, Naomi, and their fragile household. Jacob sits in waiting rooms and hospital corridors where time is elastic and hope thins. He is a man whose life is oriented around a child that is not yet born. Everything he has is measured in small, meticulous preparation: scripts assembled, vitamins purchased, names discussed into the night. Naomi's condition arrives like a storm cloud rolling in too quickly. She has been through a cascade of symptoms that turned a routine day into an emergency: pallor, a dulling of the senses, a pain that wedges itself beneath the sternum and stays. The fear here is clinical but also intimate. Jacob's mind attempts to hold both the medical and the personal, the doctor's sterile words and Naomi's whispered confession that she fears losing the baby. In the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, we feel his panic sharpen into a kind of tender ferocity. Naomi, for her part, is a study in contradictory clarity. In physical terms she is fading, blood pressure wavering, consciousness fraying, but in the small, lucid moments she exhibits a fierce maternal instinct that is the film's emotional core. She grips Ashley's hand, Ashley, who is not a doctor but a friend, a witness, someone whom Naomi knows can be persuaded or broken. Naomi makes a plea that is not dramatic but pure: keep the baby. The words are simple, absolute, and they reveal a woman stripped to essentials. She does not ask for herself, she asks for the life within her. Her consciousness narrows to the core of human preservation, and in that fracture we see the deepest, irreducible force in the story: the will to protect what we carry inside, whether it is a child, a secret, or an old promise. The camera does not dramatize her lines with swells of music, instead it gives us the harshness, the beeping monitors, the sterile curtains, and leaves the viewer in the room with the raw fear. Jacob's worry is complicated by memory. He remembers the ultrasound image that showed a tiny hand, a promise of a future. He thinks of ordinary future's first steps: scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the thought of a vanished child becomes an absence so immense it threatens to swallow him. The film uses close-ups to show the way grief can preempt loss. The fear becomes anticipatory grief, a cruel rehearsal for something he is desperate to stop. He runs through contingencies in his head: private insurance, hospital contacts, who would take the child if Naomi does not survive, calculations that are both practical and heartrending. Every decision is a bargaining chip. Every waiting room conversation is freighted with a family's future. Ashley's role is to be the pivot between hope and despair. She is present as a hand to hold, a voice to steady, a person to bear witness to Naomi's last coherent requests. She is also a person of her own fears. The scene asks the audience to consider what it means to be entrusted with someone else's most intimate desire. Naomi's plea is a litmus test for Ashley. Will she fight for this unborn life? Will she carry Naomi's wish forward should the unthinkable happen? Her face, a ledger of emotions, answers through small gestures: the squeeze of a hand, the set of a jaw, the way she repeats Naomi's name as if repeating could tighten fate's thread. Back at Bill's house, the action is accelerating. The narrative is not only about the moral choices of Hayley and Randy but also about the mechanics of human error. Randy's arrogance is a motor. He believes he can predict consequences, control outcomes, and mitigate risk. He misreads Hayley's silence as consent. He underestimates the physical vulnerability of Bill and overestimates the elasticity of human guilt. The time between Bill's collapse and the arrival of help becomes an arena where character is tested. Hayley, isolated by her traitor's secret, stands on a knife edge. She glimpses two possible futures: one where she steps forward, administers aid, and faces legal consequences with remorse; another where she does nothing and crosses a moral line from which there may be no return. The screenplay amplifies tension by lingering on trivial details: the way light slants on the floor, the odor of frying onions from dinner earlier, the muffled sound of a neighbor's television. These scraps of normalcy amplify the horror of the present. By contrast, the house, which is supposed to be a refuge, becomes an incubator of dread. Every picture frame a silent jury. Bill's breathing is a stuttering metronome that sets the rhythm of the scene. The camera watches Hayley's hands, small, capable, stained with the minutiae of daily life as they inch toward the medication she knows could steady him. Randy's shadow, in contrast, is a solid bar that blocks her access. Their conflict is not cinematic acrobatics but a tense, domestic altercation where the prize is nothing less than a man's life. At the same time, there is a broader tension in the arcs of these characters. Hayley's personal history is layered. She is not a one-dimensional figure seeking money for its own sake. The film provides backstory in her mother's unpaid medical bills, the humiliation of being turned down for loans, the nights spent shelving pride for survival. Randy, in turn, is painted as a man for whom quick fixes are not just temptation but identity. He has an entrepreneurial, if criminal, flair for schemes, a charisma that can be persuasive to the desperate. Bill, though flawed, is a portrait of ordinary decency. He is stubborn, yes, and sometimes petty, but also protective. His collapse forces the audience to weigh the cost of betrayal in real terms. Jacob's storyline remains uncomfortably parallel yet thematically linked. The fear of losing Naomi and the baby reverberates against Hayley's choice. Both involve the question of what we do when faced with life or death situations. Both ask whether love is enough to anchor us or whether survival urges can override the most tender bonds. Jacob's frantic planning, calling specialists, pacing hospital corridors, negotiating with nurses mirrors Hayley's internal argument about whether one small act now can produce a lifetime of safety. The screenplay sets up these dual crises to examine what desperation can do to moral judgment. As the scene intensifies, another thread in this web enters with a sense of urgency that the film does not undercut. The script has given her purpose: a quick-run neighbor, a friend who knows Bill's habits, someone who is intuitively on his side. Whether she arrives by chance or because of some earlier sign is less important than her role as the potential savior. The audience holds its breath as she approaches the house, a figure moving through the suburban landscape toward an unknowable interior. The question the narrative leaves hovering like fog is crystalline: will Bill be discovered in time? Will Danny burst through the door to find him and call an ambulance, to hold him in the thin strip between breath and nothingness? Or will the house become a tableau of what might have been, with legal knots and moral fallout waiting for those left to clean up? The climactic tension is achieved not through melodrama but through accumulation. Small choices: text messages left unread, a vial left on a counter, a hand on an emergency bottle compound into catastrophic consequence. The film's logic is psychological rather than procedural. It examines how people rationalize and how the mind rewires when faced with irrevocable acts. Each character represents a response to pressure. Bill is the betrayed, Hayley, the tempted, Randy, the predator, Jacob, the protector, Naomi, the vulnerable, Ashley, the witness, Danny, the possible rescuer. The house is the crucible where these elements are brought to boiling point. The end of this sequence refuses to tie everything up neatly. It lingers instead on question marks. There is a deliberate withholding of closure. The scene ends in breathless ambiguity. Is there redemption in Hayley's trembling movement? Will Jacob's frantic phone calls yield a miracle? Can a life in utero be preserved by human will? The audience is left with the rawness of these human stakes and the thin, precarious possibility of salvation. The final images are sensory close-ups: a hand clasping a yellowed pill bottle, a heartbeat monitor's faint flutter, the wet imprint of a footprint on a doormat, a phone screen showing an outgoing call that started but didn't finish. These images are not answers, they are evidence of lives on the brink, and the film, faithful to its title, gestures always toward what lies beyond the threshold, beyond choices, beyond redemption, beyond gates we might someday wish to open or slam shut. The scene's moral geometry is crafted with cruelty. It forces viewers to consider whether a desperate circumstance ever justifies a violent shortcut. It forces us to interrogate the human capacity for self-justification, to watch how a person like Hayley can be transformed by layers of small compromises into a person who stands between a man's life and a plan gone awry. And it insists on the human cost, the faces that will have to live, and perhaps die, with the choices made in a yellow-lit living room on an ordinary night. The tension holds because the film refuses to give easy verdicts. It leaves compassion and condemnation in the same frame, asking the audience to decide which will count in the small, terrible moment when breath meets the floor. The last beat before the narrative pauses is a close, intimate sequence of looks. Hayley looks at Bill and sees not just the man who has betrayed or supported her but the boy who once mended her bicycle chain, the hand that steadied her during storms. Randy looks at Hayley and sees a means to an end. Bill, half-conscious, reaches for a name, perhaps Hayley's, perhaps something older, perhaps a different word entirely, and the audience can imagine what memory or regret that single syllable might unlock. Jacob clutches an image of the child's ultrasound on his phone and whispers a name that has not yet been made real. Naomi, between lucid requests to Ashley, dreams of lullabies she hasn't sung. Danny's footsteps quicken outside the door, the movement of someone about to force the narrative into a resolution the film temporarily withholds. And here, suspended like a note held too long, the first portion halts, not with a clean conclusion but with the world leaning forward, waiting, breath held, as the possibility of rescue and ruin hang in a fragile balance.